Hi, I'm Annie Fitzsimmons. I'm your Washington REALTORS Legal Hotline Lawyer, and this is another episode in the series entitled Operation Evolve. And in this episode, we're looking at terminology, new terminology to the agency law, terminology that describes that relationship where one broker represents both the buyer and the seller as limited dual agency. The only difference in this title between the revised agency law and the former agency law is the addition of the word limited in front of dual agency. Why did the legislature add one word to the concept of dual agency? Because the concept of limited is actually a much more accurate description of what a dual agent is to the consumers than not having that limiter, that additional word. What do I mean by that? When an agent is a dual agent, now let's understand what that means. That means that we're talking about single agent dual agency. That means that one individual broker is both the listing agent by written agreement with the seller and also the buyer agent by written agreement with the buyer. So one broker has a written agency agreement with the seller and a written agency agreement with the buyer. Then and only then is that one agent a limited dual agent. And when a broker is a limited dual agent, they are prohibited from advocating on behalf of either the seller or the buyer. A dual agent isn't somebody who gets to help both parties by telling each party what's best for them or advocating their interests. It's just the opposite. A limited dual agent is a conveyor of information only. The limited dual agent gets to take information from the seller and give it to the buyer, and from the buyer and give it to the seller, without advocating on behalf of either the buyer or the seller. Because as soon as a dual agent advocates on behalf of the buyer, then they are taking an action that is adverse or detrimental to the interests of the seller. And the same is true if the dual agent advocates on behalf of the seller, then they're taking action that is adverse or detrimental to the interests of the buyer. And by definition, that would violate the agency law. So a single agent, dual agent, is prohibited from advocating on behalf of either party. And that's a big deal. If a consumer has hired you as their broker, then to move from a place where you are their advocate to a place where you are prohibited by law from advocating on their behalf, that's not something that should happen to the consumer without them really understanding the concept and, in addition, consenting to it. So, effective January 1st, 2024, no broker can serve as a single agent, dual agent, unless both the seller and the buyer have consented by separately initialing a paragraph in the agency agreement, whether it's the listing agreement or the buyer agency agreement. The consumer must separately initial a paragraph explaining the limited dual agency and the consumer consenting to the broker serving as a limited dual agent. And if your client, either buyer or seller or both, have not initialed that paragraph, then you shall not be a single agent, dual agent. If you have questions on this topic or any other, please ask me a question by visiting WARealtor.org. Thank you for being a Washington REALTORS member.